Should the U.S. pay reparations to black citizens? What do you guys think about this? Should they?
Reparations?
Yeah.
First of all, we got to get it together as a community.
Before we start asking for anything, right?
Anything, yeah. Dr. Umar said it the best, because he broke it down and he said something like this: if we're in a meeting talking about reparations and we have a Chinese person come in there and they're going to be like, why are you guys asking for reparations when you're still making us rich? Why are you guys asking for reparations when you're basing your status off of designer clothes that you wear, instead of giving that back to our community to open up schools, open up different shops and stuff for black people? The majority of things you see in the hood are Chinese restaurants making the Chinese people rich, and white cafes and all of this different type of stuff, that if we didn't buy Jordans and try to look a certain way, we could put that back into our community and have our own coffee shops around our own areas and feel more safe, because it's more black people involved in our own community.
Yeah, well, the whole thing with that is we need more black business owners.
Right, exactly. There you go.
That simple. We need more black business owners.
The only business we own is weed.
But that's still we're still doing illegally, because people haven't opened up shops around us. They just work in the shops, but who owns those shops?
Right.
We don't own them.
That's true.
I see what people got to say right now.
Issue. A Pew Research poll taken in late 2021 found that by a more than 2-to-1 margin, Americans oppose reparations for African Americans. And look at the racial split. Whites overwhelmingly oppose reparations, 80%. But the numbers are almost exactly reversed among African Americans, who strongly support the idea. So joining me now is Cornell William Brooks. He's a professor of the practice of public leadership and social justice at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's also a former president and CEO of the NAACP. And Coleman Hughes is a columnist and host of the Society and Culture podcast, Conversations with Coleman. Both of you have agreed to essentially lightly debate this issue with me, as playing my role of moderator here. So, Cornell Brooks, let me start with you. You've been studying this for quite some time, and you've been working with some religious leaders to come up, I think it's fair to say, a modern blueprint of what you think, what would reparations look like in the 21st century? Make the case.
That's right. So I've had the pleasure and honor of working with both the National Council of Churches and the Union of Reform Judaism, and a group of Harvard Kennedy School students who are working with these large religious associations all across the country, representing over 40 million people, to create a moral discourse on reparations. Why?
I feel like a lot of people are still in a slave mindset,
right?
Honestly.
And I don't feel like white people wants to give us the reparations as well, because they still technically got us picking cotton. Because what is money made out of? It's made out of what, 80-90% of cotton, if you really want to break it down. And if we get into how you do your you write a check for somebody and stuff like that, when you get into those different type of things, they still really literally got us picking cotton, and we don't even know it.
Why? Because we know that in many corners of our republic, it's being politically weaponized. And they're endeavoring to make, I'd say, 3 key points here.
I don't think that we're the only ones doing. There's a lot of people, everybody in the world is picking cotton. Now, you have to pick cotton. That's how true it is. You have to pick cotton to survive now. If you don't pick cotton,
I agree with that.
Then we don't.
I think it's just a money thing now. Do you have enough money not to be able to pick cotton?
That's what I'm about to say.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
It's not about picking it now.
Yeah.
It's about how much do you have.
That's
you know.
Yeah.
It's just a class here.
The first of which is with respect to reparations, you often hear that the harm was too long ago, it's too expensive, and too impossible, too difficult to do. What we find is the harm was not long ago, right? So in other words, yes, slavery ended in 1863 and 1865, but the convict leasing system, representing 1 million people enslaved, lasted up until the opening days of World War II, right? And all of these systems of oppression continue into the present, point one. Point two, with respect to reparations being too difficult. I want to know something here, Chuck, that's critically important. My colleague, Linda Bilmes, who's a public economist at the Harvard Kennedy School, we've done a study, and we looked at all of these programs across the federal government, and we make the case that we're already doing reparations. We simply don't call it that. So in other words, there's a norm in government which essentially says, if an American has been harmed through no fault of their own, the government will often step in to try to make them whole. We do this not only with respect to Japanese Americans who were interned after World War II, but we also do it with respect to veterans, with respect to people who suffered in a natural disaster. We do it with respect to children who've been harmed by vaccines. We do it with respect to pensions that are insured. So we do this over and over again, which says that we can do it. And lastly, we do it at the level of millions, billions, even trillions of dollars. So we can afford to do it.
All right, Coleman Hughes, let me bring you in here. You testified before Congress in 2019 against the idea of reparations. You said paying reparations to descendants of slavery would, quote, only divide the country further. And you thought it would insult black Americans by putting a price on the suffering as well, and would make black Americans like yourself victims without their consent. I hope I captured that correctly, but you take it further. Make your case against.
So let me just make a distinction.
The Caribbean people that came to this country and take them out of the equation, they will have to separate up a lot, because even though we're all African American here, a lot of people came from Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica, and they created American black kids here, but they're not from, they're not from the United States as well. That's also a big factor.
Yeah, like a lot of our parents, and that doesn't mean that they weren't slaves in our history. Obviously, that there were, but they didn't necessarily have to be here.
Right. Exactly.
Make a distinction off the bat. I support reparations for redlining, right? Because there are many victims of redlining that are still with us. They're still alive. And Cornell, all the examples of successful reparations for other groups that you highlighted were examples of reparations given to directly the victims of these human rights abuses in their lifetimes or their immediate family members. That's why I support reparations for redlining paid directly to the victims, as they're doing in Evanston outside of Chicago. I make a distinction between that and reparations for slavery, which ended in 1865. I know of no examples where groups are getting reparations for historical crimes that are over 150 years old. And unfortunately, the opportunity was tragically missed to pay it to the slaves themselves or their immediate families. But claims like this time out, right? And this is timed out. And let me say one more thing. Martin Luther King had a plan for addressing the legacy of slavery, which he laid out in his book, Why We Can't Wait. And he called it the Bill of Rights for the Disadvantaged. The Bill of Rights for the Disadvantaged was not a race-based policy. It was a class-based anti-poverty program that would benefit the black poor and the white poor and the poor of all races. That's what I support in terms of addressing the legacy of slavery. That's what I feel is the wisest path forward for this country.
Let me follow up a little bit, Coleman, because it is interesting that there are some forms of specific areas where you believe a reparation of sorts should be put there. How do you distinguish Jim Crow? And what
about how at the end of the day it's not even really about the race, right? It's about the class, and that's why things need to be set in motion to help the different classes out.
Exactly.
Right? If you can't afford to have one child or two children and support your family with your job, you can't say then America's like how it was for like 50 years ago or even a couple. It's not the same.
It's not even the same.
You can't expect people to want to be in certain areas of America the same way they were 50 years ago, 100 years ago.
Take that off?
Yeah, take it off.
And then too, we're in the Greatest Depression now, because if you do stats from the Great Depression, the average household was 300,000. The average household now, and that was the Great Depression.
All the stats from the Great Depression we're repeating right now are worse.
They're worse.
Right,
They're worse.
and that tells you something that we aren't. It doesn't look like it because things are different. Technology is different. We're able to you got every 25 years, 10 years, decade, whatever. Comfort changes for everyone, and we don't feel it. It's just like aging. You don't really look at yourself and say, "Oh, this little wrinkle came up." That wrinkle was forming for the past 5 years, right? You don't really see it until it's all said and done.
Right.
Just like how everything around us has been changing, all the walls have been getting better. hire all the stuff, but we still have these divisions in classes that we have not been able to help. Yeah. The amount of homeless people since COVID in New York have been ridiculous.
And then they try to raise the rent prices by 15%.
And then they're still raising the rent.
And they're trying to raise the train station prices to $2.90 now.
Yeah.
Like,
I just don't understand how what the government solutions are to these problems, and how it all feels like a big business. Like they're just doing it for themselves. Like, we're just gonna keep trucking and driving and keep telling you what you want to hear, and then pull the rug out from under you. Yeah, but the rug hasn't been pulled yet. They're gonna keep taking and keep taking and keep taking and keep taking.
Yep. Because people are not realizing, like I said, in our community, if you want reparations, you got to realize what they're doing to you. They're putting Jordans, Gucci, all of that in front of you, but these are people's last names that you're making rich, instead of taking that money and putting it back into our community.
Yeah, you putting it all into that one brand. Brand. But imagine there was a brand like a real estate brand, but all that money goes into the community.
Yeah.
You can invest in it. Actually, isn't that a great idea?
Yeah.
Something like a nonprofit that you can just invest in, and you know it's going straight into
our community,
into the community
and stuff like that.
What is the right amount of time? And I say that Germany is still paying reparations to now descendants of Holocaust victims. So what is the timeline where you feel like where you would draw the line?
So I think reasonable people can disagree on this, and I don't claim to have the last word on the subject, but I think we can all agree reparations should be paid ideally in the lifetime of the victim. If the victim dies, it should be paid to their spouse or to their children. Once you get to grandchildren and beyond, my personal view is that that's beyond my line. But like I said, reasonable people can disagree on this, but there's no doubt that, in my view, crimes from the 1850s and 60s are beyond the statute of limitations.
Do you see this where services can sort of be what is reparations? So maybe it is free college, maybe it's discounted college, maybe it is tax breaks, however you want to describe it. Is that an acceptable form in your opinion?
It is an acceptable form. And when we look at what we call reparatory compensation programs in government, they use a variety of strategies to help make people whole. But let's go to this point about indirect victims. When we look at the policies, when we look at government, when we look at history, we actually do compensate people who have suffered a harm indirectly and their heirs. Think about this. So in Tulsa, Oklahoma, right, Black Wall Street was bombed from the air. Homes were burned on the ground. No compensation, including for victims who are over 100 years old today. But when we bombed islands in the South Pacific, as in the U.S. government, we paid compensation to direct victims, indirect victims, and their heirs as a consequence of an American government bombing people on the ground. The point being here is when you look at reparatory compensation programs, what you find is there are a variety of direct and indirect victims who are compensated for nearly every group but black people.
I want to play a clip from Ronald Reagan after he signed a bill to repay Japanese Americans who were detained during World War II. Here's what he said in August of 1988.
Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law.
Coleman, is that a model for how America should deal with this? Could it be a model for how we dealt with Japanese Americans?
Like I said, the opportunity was missed in the lifetimes of slaves. I know of 0 examples of an ethnic group getting reparations 150 years after the crime in question. Now, when it comes to honor and symbolic apologies, I completely support those. I'd also like to point out many have been made, and almost none have been really accepted by the spokespeople for Black Americans. So, for example, Both houses of Congress officially apologized for slavery and Jim Crow in 2008 and 2009. The Senate officially apologized for lynching in 2004. Slavery is, of course, a state's issue, as you know, and at least 8 different southern states have issued official apologies for slavery. We have a beautiful museum in the nation's capital, which opened with an extensive exhibit on slavery in the Middle Passage, which was overflowing with patrons when it opened. I think we have made many gestures and symbolic gestures to give that sort of honor that Reagan was talking about.
Hey, Cornell and Coleman, you guys were terrific, very polite debate on something that can be very divisive in our society, but that was the whole point of why we invited you guys here.
Because we are the power. You know what I mean? If we come together and we push that, we'll be able to. We don't need a Kim Kardashian to say, oh, she wants to help black people out in the law.
Right.
It could be us. You know what I mean? We don't need a Donald Trump to give us a stimulus check or stuff like that.
It's anyone can become trendy, right? And that means anyone can make a difference.
You're right.
It's that
and then too, our community, I'm not gonna lie, is kind of lazy because Dr. Umar was building a school and he went to our own people first to try to help him make the school eligible to start running. And it took him, he said it took them about 6 months and they got nothing done. Then he had to go to white people and they got it done really fast. They started just doing things. We have to want to do things for our community and not just say, oh, this is bad, this is bad. Why is it bad? We don't move fast enough when it comes to our own people and do stuff productively for our own people. But then when other people, other races are moving forward, we're like, oh, they're just moving forward because they have a disadvantage. No, they come together and they get things done for their own community fast.
That's something I always admire about like the Jewish community,
Yes.
or the Indian community. The way they stick together, and I'm not saying sticking together means you have to also shoo off everyone else.
Right, or like everyone else.
Or even like everyone else. But with the way that they have each other's back, I can respect that. Right? That's what a community is.
I feel like everybody's gone into a stigma. These schools and all these things divide us in a way. Because when you get to school, it's about who has the best. And then it goes into who looks the best, and then it goes into who has the most hair. That's why Spanish and black communities don't thrive as much as Indian and Jewish communities, things like that, because what do they do in Jewish communities? They have to wear a certain thing. Nobody Jewish wears what they want to wear unless they're not following their culture. In India, they have to wear their hijabs. Nobody looks different. Nobody's pointed out and to say unless they disattach themselves from that culture, from that religion. You know what I mean? Yeah. Here, we're free to do what we like to do. We wear what we want to wear. We do our hair how we want to do our hair. So they divide us from those things. In those countries, they can't be divided because everybody looks the same. Everybody's going for the same things. Nobody's going for anything different.
And not only that, if you go back to Indian culture, they really don't base themselves off of hair because the reason why most of them grow their hair is to donate and cut it off for spiritual reasons as well, to keep them back into their own community. We don't have a sense of that. No. We don't have a sense of
we don't have a sense because nobody wants to dig into their background,
into
who
their
they
own
are,
culture.
what their culture is.
I was just gonna say, I think one of our biggest problems is that we relied so much on Christianity. As the black community relied so much on Christianity when we all know we were kind of forced into
that. Right. Yes. That's not really our culture.
That's not really our culture. I think maybe if we tried better to hold on to our culture, because there have been plenty of peoples in history who have held on to their culture through slavery or through slavery-like events. So there wasn't really a reason why we shouldn't have. My only guess is over time it was easier to give into Christianity, but
it wasn't easier. When after
I wasn't there, obviously. So
after them having, after you do something repetitively over and over again and you lose your language and you start talking English, it was just something that was repeated. They had to beat that out of us.
That's fine.
Going down generations.
But where are the secret I wouldn't say secret cults, but that's all these are. Like it's like you say cult and you think negative.
I think that
black
people use Christianity in a way to keep us together.
And
to keep us like
that's what they feel like, but they don't understand that that's the way that's keeping us enslaved. You're keeping up the enslaved culture because who pushed that on us? White people. So that's not really our culture. So why do we uphold something
me and Nala always say this, we don't really know who wrote the Bible. We don't really know who put those things in there. We don't really know. Obviously, there are a lot of things from back in the day that can be true, that can be, but all the rest of the information, what do we know is real? What do we know is fake? That's why I wouldn't sit here and depend on Christianity because
we don't know who wrote that, but we do see that they still practice in Africa all the stuff that's been practiced for years, and is a test to time. It's not something that came out of a book, and that you see those communities still thriving. They're still one. They still have those.
A lot of their stuff have to do with their surroundings.
Yeah, the earth,
environment,
exactly,
things like that. And,
exactly.
And I think, look, if none of this spiritual stuff is real, right, and everything, we just drop dead and that's it, it's just lights out and energy, nothing, right? That's one thing. But if anything else is real, if there's any type of like spirituality or energy that continues, then it doesn't matter who's right or wrong in terms of religion. What matters is that you find your truth and follow your truth. That's the only way you're going to be able to find, I think, not to use the word again, but to find your truth.
Yeah.
Right?
And not just because somebody's teaching you this and it came out of a book.
Now the book can help you find the truth, but you have to find it.
Right.
It's all in
you and not following something blind. And I feel like that's why too we can't get it together as a community, because each of us are following something that's blind, whether it be chasing materials or chasing the Bible. We're not finding a true sense of self. So if we want to ask for reparations, we have to have a sense of self. We don't have a sense of self in our own community. You see, you have Chinese people, Indian people, and other people in different cultures have a sense of self. You know the meat of their core, what they're about. What do we have that we're about? That's a meat, that's a core, that's something that we can say that's a sense of self. That's the black community.
Well, we got
rap
music,
rap
Jordans.
Music,
What is that? Yes, that's carrying the culture that puts people on and makes them popular. But is that something that's going to be a core thing that lasts forever? Because trends always change.
Yeah, and obviously rap changes.
Exactly.
Rap has changed a lot. And rap might not always be a thing we want to associate ourselves with. Who knows what rap is going to be in the future? Not that I'm saying that's something that we should want to dissociate ourselves from.
But it's just
I understand we don't have something core.
Right.
We're gonna be like, hey, this is who we are.
Together.
Right.
Exactly. Something we can all rally on.
Right.
On. Like,
that's not Christianity.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because that's not realistic.
But I do agree. It probably should have been a religion. But what do I know?
I mean, not a religion. It's just something that we all continuously practice.
That's a religion.
You're both you're right. Yeah.
That's my point. Like it didn't have to be Christianity, but I just feel like whatever religion we ended up choosing, it should have been something.
But this is the thing. We already have a core religion. We just push that out and push Christianity because we already have a core religion.